Hello and welcome to the first of 4 short talks on gender, sexual and relationship diversity for adult learners. I'm Jenny and my pronouns are she, her. And I bring this series of short talks to you over the month of October on the theme of GSRD. I've been a counsellor for 10 years and have worked in the field of mental health and well-being with children and families for over 20 years. I've been delivering relationship and sex education since 2003, more recently for groups of professionals and universities, and I'm a member of SEE, the Sex Education Alliance. I was a full-time specialist counsellor for the West of England Gender Identity Clinic NHS for 3 years, and I have a special interest in non-binary gender identities. This subject I have a published research paper on in the International Journal of Transgender Health. Currently, I'm a counsellor in private practice based in Devon, and I counsel with Pink Therapy. I'm also an author for Sage Publications and had my first book published last year on the topic I'm talking on today. The book is called Lessons in Love and Understanding. These talks have come about through the book Lessons in Love and Understanding, which I co-authored with chartered teacher and psychologist Dr. Scott Buckler, to support teachers implement the latest statutory requirements for delivering relationship and sex education in schools across the UK in an all-inclusive way. It's great that today's young people now should have access to comprehensive relationship and sex education. However, anybody currently above the age of 18 has missed out on this opportunity at school. The result of this is that we have lots of false and unhelpful ideas around gender, sexual and relationship identities, and these can frequently come back to bite us throughout our adult lives and leave us feeling confused, ashamed, embarrassed, fearful or just plain awkward if we're not privy to safe, sound and solid information about this very important subject matter. So within this 15 minutes, I'd like to talk on the title theme, What is Normal? The October series will also cover Week 2, Gender, Names and Pronouns, Week 3, Exploring Sex and Sexuality, Week 4, Relationship Diversity, and then there should be a final session in which I'll try and answer any questions that you send to me around what I've been talking about over those 4 weeks. I provided my email address in the slide here, which is jennigatestherapy@gmail.com, for any questions that you have. Can I ask at this stage, can any questions please be kept general for me to address in another short Q&A info talk at the end of the month, and not be personal either about your own or anybody else's personal situation, nor indeed my own? Thank you. So it's 2021 and few adults have ever received formal relationship and sex education. So let's go back to basics. First of all, I invite you to consider your own ideas about relationships. What does a healthy and loving relationship look like or feel like to you? If you're interested in romantic relationships, do you consider your needs and what you might be prepared to invest in a relationship depending on the needs of the person or people you're in relationships with? Is there an ideal relational commitment for you, perhaps marriage and monogamy, or maybe you rather identify as being single and have friends with benefits? The list of questions could go on, but my point is that actually very few people stop and consider their relational needs. And most people are reactive, sometimes passive, in figuring out how to navigate a relationship that has come about through attraction and or conformity to the social and cultural norms of the communities to which we belong. Now, before we go any further, please be aware that there's no judgment around any of this or right or wrong ways of being in relationship or not being in relationship. There's simply diversity. And then there's also what's known as CompHet, which stands for compulsory heterosexuality, which is the idea that heterosexuality and cis-binary gender identity is assumed and enforced by a patriarchal and heteronormative society. So that's a bit of a mouthful. I'll throw in a couple of definitions, then repeat that sentence. And by the way, this is an important feature of good relationship and sex education, regardless of the age of the learner, because language can be a real barrier at all levels of this subject. I'd always encourage exploration of even terms you feel familiar with, as RSC terms can have so many different meanings across cultures, age groups, time, and dialect. And we will learn so much by exploring in depth the uses of language and what we or others might consider appropriate or inappropriate. So, cisgender refers to anybody whose gender identity is the same as the gender to which they were assigned at birth. Heteronormative is the attitude or belief whereby heterosexuality is promoted as the normal or superior sexual orientation. We refer to binary gender as the belief that there are only two distinct genders, male or female. To revisit that sentence, comphet, compulsory heterosexuality, is the idea that heterosexuality and cis-binary gender identity is assumed and enforced by a patriarchal and heteronormative society. And it is within this very assumption that society gives us a false idea of what is normal, which creates a dichotomy for society then to deem what is abnormal. If we adults didn't have formal relationship and sex education at school or in further education, where have we learned about relationships, sexuality and gender? If we take time to reflect on what shaped our ideas about relationships, or what continues to, it's likely we'll have learnt from our families, parents, siblings, peers, partners, literature, media, reality TV shows, commercialism, movies, pornography, and so on. Again, we have such a bias to the heteronormative and no visibility or real representation of diversity, which is not reflective of real life. You'll perhaps have noticed that I haven't said I'm delivering LGBTQI+ friendly relationship and sex education. The reason for that is that this creates the idea of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex plus identities as being the other or outside of the norm. For people belonging to LGBTQI+ communities, there's no denying that this may be part of what we have experienced or still experience. However, the point I want to make is this: we are all different and diverse. And at the end of this series of talks, I hope that everybody can see how this applies to each and every single one of us and our own unique identities and perspectives within the beautiful and exciting world of gender, sexual and relationship diversity. Often the only way we can be open to difference and possibility is when we become aware of our own assumptions and societal norms that we consciously or unconsciously conform to without taking the time to explore our own unique perspectives. Discovering and exploring self is such an important thing for all of us to do. Embracing who we are, how we feel, and celebrating our unique self is key for self-worth and our health and well-being. But also examining our blind spots and the things we might assume to be true of the world around us. Once we are aware of our blind spots, we can live in a truly inclusive way and help others to also be able to see that there are all different kinds of relationships, and as such, families take all different shapes and form. These lessons are absolutely appropriate for all ages, as everybody should feel that their family system is represented when we talk about and consider what are loving, caring families. Some families have a mum and a dad who live together. Some have more than two parents. Some have grandparents and foster parents. Some have a single parent by choice. Some have step-parents or other family members live in the same house. Some families co-parent. Some families don't have children, and so on. An extension in this is considering gender. As with relationships, we are very much indoctrinated into believing in a male female binary gender construct, which is so very hard to step free from. Having spent 3 years working for the NHS in the West of England Gender Identity Clinic, I recall at the beginning of my training one of our top psychiatrists telling me that it took him a whole year to get his head around gender when he'd first started at the clinic. So why? Because he had to deconstruct all that he had learned throughout his life from a very young stage in age and try and relearn from science rather than society. When you think about it, we make assumptions around gender often from a 20-week pregnancy scan and have all kinds of ideas around boys and girls that really often aren't particularly helpful or useful. I invite you to consider any ideas you might have been taught or picked up on your life's journey about gender. Have you learned consciously, subconsciously, unconsciously to think of gender as a simplistic binary construct? What kind of stereotypical ideas might you hold about men or women or non-binary people or maybe transgender people? Have you spent much time considering your own gender identity? And if so, are you able to see your gender identity as being unique to you? If you have siblings or children in your family of origin or your current family system, perhaps take some time to think about gender identity, stereotypes, and perceived norms within your family and any communities to which you belong. This isn't a blame game, but rather for you to bring awareness to your own unique experiences and to consider societal gender constructs and their impact with fresh eyes on your own world. Science has shown us that boys or males are not necessarily born with a penis, that girls don't necessarily have a vulva or vagina, and that non-binary gender identities certainly do exist. Now, if we look at how RSE has been taught over the years, and that sex education has been largely based on textbook reproduction, maybe with a dodgy video or some pot plants thrown in to further one's understanding of human biology. And always been between cis male and cis female. So it's really not surprising that we have a skewed understanding and definition of sex. The most common understanding of sex is penis and vagina penetrative intercourse. So let's just stop and think about exactly how unhelpful this is. How many people does this exclude from what we consider to be sex? There are many, many ways to have sex. More about this on week 3, which is good news for all of us, including those who identify as heterosexual, given that only 6% of people with vaginas regularly orgasm from this type of sex. And it's not all about the orgasm either. Did I mention the patriarchy? Moving on. The key thing to remember here is that we must not make assumptions about anybody's gender identity, sexuality, or relationship status, desires, practice, or goals based on our ideas about how a female, male, or non-binary person might present or what society tells us is normal. And the best place to start thinking about all of this in a real and meaningful way is to give yourself some time to explore your own unique blend of gender, sexual, and relationship diversity. So in the weeks to follow, I'll outline some excellent resources to aid you in your GSRD learning journey. But for now, I shall leave you with this brief introduction and thank you for watching on week 1.